and depending on which discipline you come from, you have a different perspective. I would call it negative externalities being internalized, and the trillions of dollars of subsidies that the World Bank and IMF estimate do sometimes include taxes to consumption, and 2 trillion of them are cash, and 5 trillion of them are polluter not pays. So let's continue. I'd like to invite the social policy to come forward and take a seat. You have a choice as to whether you would like to present at the podium. Some people prefer that. I will certainly introduce you all from the podium if you would like, if you have slides to show. So we're now going to move on to this, I think, very critical panel of social impact. And we're thrilled to have with us 3 wonderful presenters. Sophie Nicholls, who is the Associate Professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Teesside University. Dr. Eleanor Hadley Kershaw, who is the Senior Lecturer in Sustainability and Circular Economy here at the University of Exeter. And Peter Benhur Nyeko, who is the founder and CEO of Mandulis Energy from Uganda. I'll introduce each of them in more depth. And perhaps, Sophie, while you're finishing jogging, I will give a little more detail on you. You've got a lot of experience as a learning consultant. You previously worked at Reuters Group, have an interest in integrative psychodynamic therapies, and your current work involves creative approaches to challenges such as climate change, equity, social justice, and well-being, and researching those interconnections. So, Sophie, wonderful to have you with us. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you all about my work in climate emotions. I presented last year online, so it's great to be here in person. Yes, so just listening to that discussion and thinking about emotions, very interesting. Emotions are everywhere in this work. I think that's what I've discovered over the last 3 years. This work actually started with a conversation with Walter over there. The first phase of my project, which is called Feeling Planet, began with some funding that I got from DCIT to develop a framework for what's called participatory public engagement in climate solutions. So the very first phase really was to scope what was going on in this area, which I discovered was not very much, actually, in terms of how emotions really affect the way that the public engage with so-called climate solutions. And I say so-called climate solutions not to dismiss the amazing work being done by people like you in this room, but I think a lot of the thinking has been, okay, we have the solutions, now we just need to get buy-in from people. We need to persuade them to do what we think is right. And sometimes that doesn't quite work. So the second phase of the project has been developing a creative toolkit. My background is really in creativity and writing. I research the relationships between creative practice and well-being and have done for about 25 years. And I think when you think about well-being now, we cannot not think about the role of planetary health in all of our well-being. That's just impossible to not include that now. So I've developed a creative toolkit. On your tables, you have just a tiny taste of one of the tools that we've been developing and testing. I've been really fortunate that over the last year, I went to ASU and evaluated the toolkit there. I've talked to people working in policy, climate scientists, as well as just the general public, lots of students, trying to develop ways of working with people that really get them thinking about, reflecting on, and acknowledging the emotional aspects of how we can solve the problem of climate change. Why is that important? Well, just to give you a few statistics, I think I mentioned last time I spoke to you in 2021, a major study of 10,000 young people, children and young people, aged 16 to 25 years in 10 countries, found that 45% of those young people said that their feelings about climate change affected their everyday lives. 45%. And actually, since then, there has been a UK survey in 2022 at the end of the pandemic where, I find this extraordinary, that in that survey, they found that people aged 16 to 24, again, reported more distress from thinking about climate change than COVID. That was in 2022. I find that absolutely extraordinary. But then also, in the course of doing this work with the Feeling Planet project, I also discovered something that I hadn't really expected, which is about all of you in this room and all of the emotions that you experience, maybe on a daily basis, because you know. We've heard, listening to Martin, listening to Klaus, you are the people that really know what is happening. How is that affecting you? Nobody ever asks you, I don't think, really. Nobody ever asks you how you feel. And I think this is really important because your feelings, your well-being affects policy, affects decisions, affects all of the discussions that you have. So it's becoming increasingly important to acknowledge that. And I have to be honest, when I started doing this work, I was really worried. I was quite apprehensive about going into rooms with people who were doing this incredible science and saying to them, how do you feel? Will you talk to me about your feelings? Can we have a discussion about emotions? Could you do some creative stuff with me where we talk about, the story of your connection with the landscapes that have formed who you are, or how you might feel working in a team with other people? I was really worried about that because, you're all very, very clever people. And, I'm a creative person, not a scientist. So... And I have been humbled by what I've discovered, because what I learned was that everyone actually, given a space to do this, wants to talk about it. Everybody actually longs to tell me how they're feeling about things. I find this really interesting. So, this is the very simple framework that we came up with. It isn't very complex, but it's probably quite difficult to implement, frankly. And it begins with acknowledging and expressing our feelings, then cultivating a sense of belonging, connection, community. Really interesting to hear Ivan talking about his Ogaya project, which seems to be all about that kind of connectedness and finding a shared language for things. And then finally, of course, very importantly, using all of that to take meaningful action. So it doesn't matter whether you're working with a group of the public, whoever they may be, or a group of scientists. These are the sorts of principles that guide what we do. And I haven't got a lot of time, I know, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of this. So if you could indulge me for a moment or two, I'm just going to invite you all now to close your eyes. Maybe just put your hand on your chest or on your stomach or whatever feels right for you. And just take a moment just to ask yourself how you're feeling right now, today, in this room. Just thinking about some of the discussions we've been having, and just noticing whatever you notice inside your body. Could be sensations of tightness or temperature or texture. Maybe for you it's a color or a shape, or just noticing whatever you notice. Just taking a moment to do that. Fantastic. Thank you. You can open your eyes. So, how often do we allow ourselves to do that? And this little tool that you have on your tables, it's something that I've been working on. Feeling wheels with emotions on them have been used in psychology for a very long time. This particular one doesn't have any words on it. It can work in conjunction with, if you go to the website, feelingplanet.org, you'll see there are lists of suggestions of words for this exercise, based on a taxonomy of climate emotions developed by a Finnish researcher, Panu Pikkola. But really what I want people to begin to tap into is, that maybe we need new language for some of these climate emotions because they are so complex, they're so multi-layered. You can be enjoying the sensation of the sun on your face on a day like this one, and also thinking about, I woke up this morning and I read the news and I saw that there are heat warnings in Andalusia. And, where I live in the northeast, it's actually 33 degrees right now, which is really strange. So on the one hand, it's a beautiful day, but then this thought creeps in, what's happening? Why is it so warm? Just as an example. So yes, I guess, I think this is maybe my older slide. I didn't expect to see that one, but actually this is good. This is a quotation that came out of some of our respondents, participants in the survey. I think this is an engineer and it captures beautifully just some of the ways in which climate emotions really affect your work. This idea of not having a scariometer or an uncertainty meter to actually gauge how to work with people. I suspect then that the slide I'm expecting may not be here. I'll just see. No, it isn't. Never mind. I just wanted to say briefly that process of noticing your feelings, your emotions inside your body, interoception, as it's called in psychology, is obviously not new. It's a very old way of thinking. It is an indigenous way of thinking. And I'd just like to reimagine a world where we hadn't forgotten how to do that, where we could actually connect with our emotions, and where we could actually think about also sensing outwards, exteroception, into the world around us, and how that actually helps us to live in this more than human world that we're just a small part of, that we're embedded in, and how that helps us to take better care of it. So thinking about the panel, here's my question. Can there be any real climate solution without addressing the emotions around climate change? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I think that is really powerful and such an important reminder. Amazing to hear about the results of the survey after COVID, that young people were more anxious about climate. And I guess eco-anxiety is a very real phenomenon. Now, my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Eleanor Hadley Kershaw, who is part of the leadership teams of the Exeter Centre for Circular Economy, the Centre for Responsible Innovation, and co-investigator on the NFRC-funded Renewing Biodiversity. So really looking forward to hearing you speak. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. I learned so much yesterday and this morning, so it's really a pleasure to be in such great company. Just seeing if my slides are appearing. Yes, amazing, thank you. So I'd like to talk to you about why responsible innovation is vital for the new carbon economy. My background is in science and technology studies. I don't know if you're all aware of this. It's a quite interdisciplinary social scientific field that studies the complex interrelations and co-constitution of science, technology and society. And one of the kind of key arguments or kind of stances of STS is the importance of considering social dimensions upstream in research and development processes. So not just thinking about social impacts downstream at the end of an R&D process, when we're thinking about commercialization, but really thinking about how our scientific and technological decisions in the lab or even earlier in agenda setting are also social and political. And we don't need to just be thinking about public acceptance, as Sophie has argued, at the end of the development process. We need to think about how our scientific and technical decisions, pathways and objects are entwined with values, norms and politics. So this is where responsible research and innovation comes in, or responsible innovation as it's sometimes referred to. This is a research and innovation governance framework and a mode of doing research and innovation that's all about taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the present. It builds on existing approaches going back 10 decades, so work of really eminent ASU scholars such as Dave Guston and Dan Sarowitz developed approaches such as real-time technology assessment, anticipatory governance, others working in the space of ethical, legal and social implications of science and technology. And responsible innovation really builds on these approaches and emerged around the kind of early 2010s as a concept and as a mode of governance. It aims to better align science and technology with societal values, needs and priorities through principles of anticipation, reflection, inclusion and responsiveness. And anybody in the UK who is dealing with UKRI as a funder, particularly EPSRC and on occasion BBSRC, will have had to thought about the EPSRC area framework and thought about how to kind of embed RRI in their work. And the idea is that research and innovation is opened up to a wider range of expertise, people and questions. So for 4 years, I was embedded in the Synthetic Biology Research Centre in Nottingham as an interdisciplinary social scientist, working to think about what responsible innovation might mean or look like in that context. And the SBRC Nottingham integrates world-leading expertise in microbial gas fermentation, metabolic engineering and synthetic biology to deliver sustainable routes to renewable chemicals and fuels towards net zero, sustainable circular economies. And so in that context, I was leading a programme of social science research across several different projects and networks, thinking about what responsible innovation might mean in the context of carbon conversion. And so in this context, industrial biotechnologies and researchers in the field of synthetic biology are aiming to engineer microbes and optimize processes to more efficiently or towards different products, use greenhouse gases to produce chemicals, fuels, materials and feed. And these microbes and the bioreactors in which they work are often referred to as microbial factories. So for example, one of our projects funded by the EU, the ENGICOIN project, aimed to create 3 new microbial factories using CO2 to produce bioplastics and commodity chemicals. And in this context, we did a range of social scientific activities. So, for example, we co-produced a compendium or a glossary of language for the project. And rather than trying to standardize the language of the project, we used this as a tool to kind of open up some of the norms and underlying assumptions that we were all bringing to this piece of work. So, for example, everybody introduced their interpretations of sustainability, and these were really quite radically different. So, for example, this might be thinking about intergenerational justice and perhaps requiring a rethinking of our existing practices, or it might involve just trying to work out how we can sustain the status quo in more sustainable ways. In this context, we also conducted interviews with team members and with stakeholders in order to foster reflexivity and dialogue to identify the visions, hopes and concerns associated with the project and its technology. We conducted 24 interviews with 26 participants across 10 countries in Europe and the US. And across a range of different sectors and organisations, so in academia, policy, environmental NGOs, small to medium enterprises, multinational corporations, industry and trade associations, consultancies, research funders, and research and technology organisations. And in this context, we really found that this kind of work on microbial factories for carbon conversion or utilisation is oriented in relation to the dual goals of addressing climate change through capturing waste gases such as carbon dioxide, as we've seen, but also using these gases as a carbon source to make chemicals, fuels and materials that would otherwise be produced using fossil resources, reducing societal reliance on petrochemicals-based feedstocks. And in practice, that means situating gas fermentation facilities in high-emitting industrial contexts, such as steel mills, cement works, power generation, or waste treatment plants. And the theme of scale really loomed large across all of these interviews, as it has here yesterday and a little bit today as well. So interview respondents frequently referred to LanzaTech as the kind of flagship case or company of biological carbon recycling. LanzaTech was the first company to operate a proprietary microbial gas fermentation process, converting steelworks off gases to ethanol at commercial scale in China in 2018. And further facilities have been established or are in construction at the moment or are planned in Belgium, India, South Africa, the UK and the US. And these tend to be large-scale industrial complexes like the one in the picture here. Participants, so researchers and people working in industry in this space, frequently frame their work in terms of circular carbon economy or circular bioeconomy. And these concepts have foundations in ecological ways of conceiving economic and material resource flows arising from ecological economics and from industrial ecology. And while perhaps these kind of ways of implementing these ideas don't embody the full interrelatedness of industrial ecosystems or industrial symbiosis imagined in some sectors, many of the developments in carbon recycling do rely on co-location with and valorizing waste streams of existing industry, such as in the case of LanzaTech's facilities. Now, organizational and spatial imaginaries such as bioclusters and public-private partnerships have become key to bioeconomy implementation generally, and also smaller scale carbon recycling projects have got ambitions for distributed, decentralized biorefinery options. So, for example, enabling farms or municipal waste treatment plants to valorize waste gases from existing or future anaerobic digestion and biogas facilities. And these kind of alternative political and socio-technical visions or imaginaries of the uses and scales of these technologies beyond these centralized industrial parks towards a smaller scale rural and agricultural community use potentially could represent a kind of way of thinking about chemical, material and waste management industries in a way that they might be restorative and regenerative by intention and design, working across species to achieve carbon fixation and social transformation. They might open up the potential for wider, more distributed or decentralized access to these technologies across a broader range of sectors and actors, where the value might not be so much about creating something from nothing, as about productively disrupting existing supply chains, material flows and socioeconomic configurations. However, despite these kind of overarching frameworks around kind of decentralization or imaginaries around decentralization and distribution, there are also the kind of risks that we found across the interviews that perhaps carbon recycling is taking on too much of a techno-optimist or perhaps even reductionist approach to mending damaged carbon cycles, cleaning up industrial systems and managing or optimizing the microbial life that's deployed to help. So it might be at risk of neglecting the crucial project of rethinking, restructuring and repairing institutions, relations and socioeconomic systems that produce the current problems. So much of this work is still framed within a growth paradigm. It aims to substitute like for like rather than reduce overall demand for products or resources. It doesn't consider potential rebound effects. So there's a chance or a risk that synthetic biology in these contexts might reinforce entrenched exploitative relations between humans and the natural world by treating bacteria as machines or as laborers to be simplified, manipulated and thereby negating their ecological dimensions. And there's a real kind of violence in some of these relations, so using predatory bacterium to try and release the product from within another bacteria, for example. So are we just trying to fix past unintended consequences with more techno-fixes? Sorry, I'm running over, and I'm aiming to reinscribe control. So I'm going to very quickly skip ahead to my conclusion, which is firstly, just to say that I think there really is hope here for thinking about distributed solutions and thinking about carbon conversion in a kind of patchwork of a range of different approaches. But in order to do that, we really need to think about the social dimensions upstream, not just think about impacts and acceptance. And responsible innovation is one approach to do that, to foster anticipation, reflection, inclusion and responsiveness. And it really enables vital questions to be asked throughout the R&I process around scale, around whether we really are doing things in the name of the public good, and etc. But in order to do that and to answer these kinds of questions, we need a diverse range of stakeholders and expertise to address these. So sorry for running over, and thank you.
And I think this is going to be a perfect segue for Peter too. So really interesting. And it reminds me of an example. Many of you are familiar with the tool Climate Trace, which is now up to something like 400 million data points as to where emissions are coming from. And my hometown of Dunedin in the South Island used that. And the young woman who was head of sustainability realized that methane in landfill was what was causing was the single biggest source of emissions. And so she persuaded the city council to add to the trash and recycling bins a food waste bin. And there was a whole program, to your points, a whole program of sensitization of the community so they understood why they needed to put their food scraps in a bin. And now it is at the municipal level, and they're making a fertilizer instead of that going to methane and landfill, and it's being commercialized. So just such a nice example of your beautiful framework. Peter, this is a wonderful introduction to you. So Peter Benhur Nyeko, who's the co-founder of Mandulis Energy, has done so many amazing things and is a World Economic Forum top innovator for both humanitarian and resilience initiatives. And I'm going to leave it there because I've heard you present before and I know you've got a lot to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll continue on with the last word I heard, hope. So I heard yesterday that, people here have a lot of hope. And I heard a gentleman a few years ago, Pope Francis, when he did his TED Talk, say the future does have a name, and its name is hope. A tiny flicker of light that feeds on that hope can shatter any shield of darkness. And there's so much hope in this room right now, and it gives me confidence that we can get there. So I'm Peter Nyeko. I spent time becoming an aerospace engineer around the corner in Bristol a couple of decades back, so it's good to be back in the southwest, and lovely weather. So I'm now based in that village up there in northern Uganda called Gotngu, where we've been for the last decade and a half, trying out interesting combinations of technologies that have been around for a while. We've had gasification forever. We've had anaerobic digestion for quite a while as well. And we've had solar PV for a while as well. So we basically combine those together to try to tackle some of the issues that we've been talking about, while at the same time connecting into the needs of communities, both in rural areas, but also plugging into urban, national, regional, and global supply chains. So this is what we basically do. We try to reimagine the idea around, generating electricity, generating power. And when we realize that the most important thing is, can we make sure it's available around the clock? Can we make sure it's available at the same quality as urban utilities? Can we make sure it's available at the same price as well? And that's what we've basically been working on. We've run a biomass gasification facility, about 50 kilowatts, for about 11 years now. And we realized that it works really well with, rice husks, maize cobs and granite shells and coffee husks and so on. And then produces biochar as well. And we realized that there was an issue, obviously, with gasification on its own, because every now and again we'd have to turn the machine off and service it. And so we decided to add solar and some battery backup to get us closer to around-the-clock operation. Reaching the farmers with the biochar, we realized that biochar on its own, even though it does amazing things for their soil, most farmers understand manure, they understand mulch, they understand digestate from anaerobic digestion. So they told us, why don't you soak this biochar, with and activated with the digestate. And we thought, why not? So we had to add anaerobic digestion as well. And then it opened up a lot more opportunities for us and kept pushing our levelized cost of electricity even lower. So right now we generate electricity at a levelized cost below 20 cents per kilowatt hour at a scale of below 100 kilowatts. We are about to scale up to 2.5 megawatts. That gets our pricing much lower than that. But the ideal range is about the 150 megawatt mark. And at that range, we're able to hit 5 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, while at the same time delivering the co-products such as activated biochar. But even more interestingly, at those bigger volumes, we can realize sustainable aviation fuel inputs because the methane that comes out of the systems, biogenic CO2, and hydrogen all feed in to the manufacture of sustainable aviation fuel. So we've realized that by focusing on electricity as our core solution, we feed into an issue that we have all around the world right now. There's a lot of demand for electricity wherever we may be. As we go more and more digital, it becomes more important to have access to large volumes of electricity around the clock. And we realize that when we combine different technologies together, it gives us that beautiful point of matching and actually get it going a bit below natural gas in terms of pricing and reliability. But at the same time, when you have all your co-products at the same time, SAF and biochar, but on top of that, we decided to add carbon capture systems on our exhaust to make sure that our gas engines have zero emissions coming out, with all of that CO2 going back in as well, adding, feeding liquid CO2 into liquid concrete alongside biochar as well. Ultimately, the whole idea is when you kind of stack up these different revenue streams, you get to a point where you have levelized, you've reached a point of levelized cost of whatever each of these are, be it electricity, be it environmental attributes such as credits, be it SAF inputs, be it biochar, whatever you're doing now at a competitive price point. And the revenue breakdown of the whole system is about a third still, kind of coming from carbon credits, but a quarter coming from electricity, and a quarter coming from SAF inputs, and the biochar itself, once activated, brings in about a fifth of the revenue. So it's lovely, kind of like blended all around. And this means even if your carbon price drops to zero, you still have a model that works. Even if electricity price drops to zero, which we've tried out actually, the model still works as well. And so you can zero any of those as need be or tweak them to basically match what the market is ready to plug into. That's what our current site looks like, and we've signed up with AfriSAF and Uganda Airlines to be supplying them in the next few years, and it's an exciting place to be. And I'll go a bit forward ahead to I think the extra notes were in a different slide. But when we get closer to 150 megawatts, that's kind of like the amazing point that we get to match large-scale hydro, large-scale gas as well. And we would need for a 150 megawatt facility close to $500 million, which is a lot of money, true. But if you think about how much we're spending in many of these nations to build a hydropower station of the same size, that's kind of what the budget basically ends up being. But you're not just getting electricity, you're getting all the others, the other points in there as well. So that makes it quite interesting from that particular point. I will go back here, and so The batteries come in quite handy as well. So imagine a 150 megawatt facility. You'll probably plan to put in batteries that cover about an hour of backup to ensure that your operation remains seamless. And we've tried this out at the capacities we have, and it's matches the grid perfectly. In the village where we've operated for 4.5 years now, we tried out an experiment of zeroing the price of electricity for a whole year to stimulate demand. Village hadn't had electricity before, so it was interesting to see what they do. Price of land went up, more people moved into the village, the demand went up, and when we started charging for the electricity, they actually set a price that matched the grid, and demand has kept on growing even after they're now paying for it. In the terms of paying for biochar that's kind of plugged in with digested, once again, they're interested in covering the cost of that on par with what you get from organic fertilizers. So yeah, so this is what we've been working on, and I'd love to talk to you more about it later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I'm hoping we've got about 8 minutes for questions before coffee break. Any comments, questions? And I know when I first met Peter, I was like, what's an aerospace engineer doing this work? And it's such a creative, circular solution which works so brilliantly economically and socially well. So, great. Comments? Yes, Francis.
Thank you. Frances Wall, University of Exeter. I just wanted to ask Peter, what's the scale of your operations? How many people in the village and how many farms are contributing? Because I always think of aviation fuel. That's got to be a really big operation, so I'm not quite sure how you're doing it. Sounds fantastic.
Thank you. So we've spent a bit of time building a biomass supply chain covering about 64,000 farmers, each of whom is cultivating over 20 hectares of land. So smallholder farmers, but it adds up. So there's a good volume of agricultural produce going through. We've also set up industrial parks that process the agricultural produce for them into the minimum level of processing that's needed to input into people like Coca-Cola, Diageo, and so on and so forth. So all the residues are left at our processing facilities, and it makes it easier to now pipe the residues in to where we pelletize them for storage and then gasify them thereafter. Yeah.
Great, huh? 64,000 smallholder farmers. Wow. Any other questions? Yes.
Good morning, Orison Hoor from Smithsonian in Panama. This comment is actually for you, Sophie. I found your presentation very interesting because as we speak about solutions for the world, we tend to forget that we're humans and emotion playing an important role. I just want to hear your thoughts about how do you think the work that you're doing can impact, for example, negotiations. I mean, those of us who have been in negotiations at a high level, and we talk about government and NGOs and all of this and scientists, what do you think would be the lesson learned that we can bring in such an environment where emotions are at sort of a high stake and play an important role at the end of the day in making final decisions?
Great question, and thank you for the question. The answer is, I don't fully know, because this is a huge challenge, isn't it? I mean, how do we work together to do that? And I think what I'm picking up, I've been at this for about 3 years now, is on the one hand, the sense of urgency. We're running out of time. People want to get things done, want to solve things. Do we really have time to have these discussions, consultations, negotiations? But I think that they're crucial, actually. So it's how do we find that balance? I think that's the question for everybody in this room, really. We have to have these consultations and discussions. We have to acknowledge our humanity, as you say, and our own emotions all the way along the process. If you're interested, on the website, which is still in the process of evaluating this creative toolkit, there's a report that you can download which talks in more detail about this and suggests a very simple framework. I'd love to have people's feedback. That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much. I'm also going to ask Jo to speak very briefly. She was not only New Zealand's climate ambassador, but she chaired the entire process. And so, Jo, you might have a comment on emotions in these high-level negotiations.
Yeah, and it's a hard one to respond to because all of these negotiators, or most of them, are government representatives. So they're constrained in what they can say and how they can position things within the negotiating process. Sometimes if governments change and the climate policy swings to the opposite end of the spectrum, people either have to start espousing a very different set of arguments and taking a very different position, or sometimes they leave government and are it's just beyond them to be able to reconcile their own personal beliefs on an environmental standpoint with the position of the government they are there to represent. So very, very difficult. I would also note, though, that some of the smaller, particularly the smaller island countries, don't have the capacity to employ their own negotiators, from their own nationalities. So they use kind of like hired mercenaries to speak on their behalf. And those people are often NGO representatives with very strong personal convictions that they bring to the negotiating table, and they've got pretty limited guidance from the governments they're representing. So it gives them quite a lot of freedom to be passionate in meetings, which can be good or not so good when you're trying to reach a consensus outcome.
Thank you so much, Jo, and thank our panelists for a brilliant panel. I'm going to pass to Martin just to close us.
Oh, well, listen, that was a really excellent panel. Thank you ever so much for doing that. I've just got one brief comment, maybe question for Peter. That was a brilliant talk. Thanks for doing it. And that's around the use of synthetic aviation fuel. I suspect, and it's a laudable thing, if you've got some sort of synthetic diesel-type product, you might as well stick it in an aeroplane because the emissions are critical in aviation and they're not coming down really. And in fact, aviation is growing as a sector. So maybe I'd like to get your opinion on that and whether you think a sort of a little health warning is probably best placed on supplying airlines with synthetic aviation fuel, because I'm sure they make a lot of it. In actual fact, the contribution is pretty minimal in terms of their total fuel use.
Awesome. As I said earlier, it's something that, I myself personally, and I'm sure many others are guilty of. I fly to every COP, and it's definitely not a solo airplane. It's we've got to get there somehow, and whatever can help reduce the use of fossil fuels makes a difference, especially in a nation like Uganda, for example, who've just struck oil and are, building a refinery, getting a kind of a SAF solution in before the refinery is built, beating the costs that they're targeting. It's just like a very polite way of of not lobbying, but saying that there could be another way. Yes.
Thank you. It's a great point. And now we're eating into everyone's coffee time. So let's not do that. Let's wrap it up at this point, and we're going to break for 15 minutes. Thank you.